It's been a long while since I've done anything on this series, so it's about time I got back to the thread of God, and that means we get to this.
How did male and female evolve?
That's right. Today, we're covering the video Hovind made on evolution. You guys are in for a treat, too. I let my Southern out in this one, and my Sergeant, so Sergeant Southern? Hovind is based in southern Alabama. Let me put it in a similar language. Tennessean should be close enough. Now, I ain't doing this to make people from the South look stupid. I made it a point till now to avoid using an accent, but it's been brought to my attention that some of what I say is hard to understand sometimes, in particular certain words that I use. If people don't understand what I'm saying, then I'm missing the mark with what I want to do on this channel, so maybe some southern slang will help stop that and force me to word things a bit different. Anyway, welcome to the Nexus. Now, when I first started working on this video, I was going to nail down his every individual lie and error. However, Logic already did that. I'll link his Hello, My Name is Kent Hovind series below and focus on key misconceptions and misleading statements pertaining specifically to biology, because if he's going to talk about evolution, I will stick to what it actually is and ignore the rest because it doesn't have anything to do with the theory of evolution. Starting with this bit of nonsense. Now, we touched on this before in the last upload I did on the series, but let's touch on this again real quick. Cosmic evolution is covered by Big Bang Theory, and I'll talk about that in my Your Next Period of Instruction is the Big Bang. It's really a basic rundown of the subject because it is a lot more complicated than people really give it credit for. Chemical evolution is covered by nucleosynthetic theory. Stellar and planetary evolution are covered by nebular theory and core accretion theory, respectively. Those in nucleosynthesis are all covered as really a bare-bones basic thing in my Your Next Period of Instruction on nucleosynthesis. Organic evolution refers to abiogenesis, which is an overlapping series of hypotheses that we are still investigating and has nothing to do with evolution, since evolution has to have ancestors and descendants and a relationship between the two. The last two on this list, macro and microevolution, are of course part of the same theory of biodiversity called the theory of evolution. Macroevolution is speciation, where one species diversifies enough to turn into another species. It's something different from its ancestors. So much so that they can no longer successfully reproduce and make babies. Microevolution is where we get different subspecies or breeds of dogs or cats or the Homo genus that has multiple species of human in it. He's lumping in nearly half a dozen scientific theories and the hypotheses of abiogenesis to boot into one overarching idea that he calls evolution, or the religion of evolutionism, which is of course not correct and a lie he's been repeating for literally decades. Evolution is not a religion in any sense of the word, as it is, for one, not based on faith and is supported by evidence and does not include the multiple other theories he listed. This little bit of bullshit is only meant to deceive his audience and set up a false equivalence and a false dichotomy. From here on, if it doesn't pertain to evolutionary biology, I don't give a damn what this convicted fraud says, because he is supposed to be talking about biological evolution. Let's move on then. Several minutes, in fact. And yeah, I'm going to be cutting a whole hell of a lot out of this video, so don't be surprised if you see a seemingly random slide that seems like it's from some other stupid point he was trying to make. It was unrelated to the topic. Trust me. I'll link his video in the description if you think I missed something, though, so let me know. I actually have enough comments to make a comment-related video, but it ain't easy being a one-man show here.
I said, a woodpecker's tongue goes all the way around the back of his head and comes on top of his left eyebrow, left nostril here. Would you please show me any fossils that have been found, intermediate species between a normal bird and a woodpecker, with his tongue going all the way around his head? What evidence do you have of how this evolved? That question never came up. I don't know what happened to it. But I said, Termites chew on wood and they swallow it, but termites can't digest it. It goes into their stomach, and there's little tiny critters in their intestines that actually digest the cellulose. Now, those little critters can't live without the termite, and those termites can't live without those critters. Which one evolved first?
Let's cover the questions you had about the woodpeckers and the termites real quick. Now, let's be clear here. Not all woodpeckers develop that long-ass tongue you're referring to. Only a few species have specialized for that. So I'll assume that that was just a misunderstanding on your part and not an outright lie. The tongue itself in red-bellied woodpeckers, for example, does not extend all the way around the back of the skull to anchor at the nasal cavity. The parts that do, however, are the sheaths of the hyoid horns, and those form the Y shape seen here on the whole thing that's called the hyoid apparatus. Now, the pointed tip goes all the way to the tip of the tongue. In hatchlings, the horns are really short because the bird is fed by the parents. As the bird grows, the hyoid horns, the sheaths, and the muscles lengthen, with the sheaths fusing to the nasal membrane when it's fully mature. Not the whole tongue itself, just the sheaths for that whole fucking thing. The hyoid is a cartilage and bone structure that supports the tongue, with the tongue itself only present on the anterior, or the one little thin piece of shit coming out the front end of the mouth. Where the forks of the horn meet, it's in the front of the mouth, just in front of the throat, okay? And the rest of that single bit extends out to the tip. It's not like it goes through the throat, okay? It's not weird like that at all. When it's relaxed, the hyoid in its entirety has a lot of slack. In this species of woodpecker, the tongue's no longer in any other bird of the same size, but when the muscles in the lower jaw contract, the horns are slid through their sheaths and the whole thing is pulled real tight to the skull, and that pushes its tongue way the hell out there like a small fucking spear. As for fossils, we don't really need them to see this trait emerge, as it is present in several species of woodpecker to varying degrees, which genetically trace back to a basal common ancestor for all of them. The structure in question would fossilize, but this trait emerged too recently for there to be fossilized remains of the woodpecker hyoid tongue bullshit at any rate. As for the termites and their gut shit, right? They evolved independently. The early precursors to termites could digest wood to an extent, but they didn't just eat that. They were like roaches. They ate damn near anything they could get their mandibles on. Now, in the process of eating the wood, they ate some bacteria that was on the wood, and since insects are cold-blooded, they didn't have a way to kill the bacteria. But the bacteria wasn't harming the termite anyway. They were both eating the same damn thing, so they developed a symbiotic relationship like we have with our own gut bacteria. Their dependence on each other grew over time, so they were able to get more nutrition out of the wood together than they would separately. And now that they specialize in just eating wood, they require one another to survive. There's no big mystery here on either point. And a little bit of actual research would have educated you on both of them. I found the answers to these questions in 5 fucking minutes, Hovind.
How did male and female evolve?
Are you serious? That goes back a long time ago when the first gamete cells developed. Gamete cells are sperm and egg cells, by the way, and that led to the emergence of sexual reproduction. We know that because life got complicated, a lot more complicated, real quick after that because of genetic drift and recombination and mutation in particular, leading to more changes much quicker than asexual or non-sexual reproduction or simple cell split and mitosis would allow. Once gamete cells developed, natural selection had a much more noticeable effect, and evolution took off in every damn direction it possibly could.
Today, everything only produces its own kind, but they say long ago and far away, they were able to do something different. Textbooks will say we started like a bacteria and slowly evolved to a human.
This is something that I think is equivocation, and for those of you that may not be aware, equivocation is where you take two definitions of a word and mix them together to try to mislead people. See, kind, and I've covered this before, is a very loose and nebulous term that has no real definition that you can match up with anything in scientific terminology in any reliable way. It's a consistently shifting goalpost till he defines kind in a consistent way that can be matched with a single term that we use in biology. This isn't really worth talking about. He doesn't understand that there's a difference between coming from bacteria and something like bacteria. Either that or he's lying, which is far more likely in my opinion. He also doesn't want to understand how life changes over time, and he doesn't want to, which he slipped up and admitted to in his debate with Arendt, which he hasn't dared go anywhere near again in more than 2 years. Something I find really telling, actually. If he believed what he said, he would try to defend it against Arendt, but he had no choice but to bury that debate because he knows damn well what would have happened if he'd have continued that particular ass-kicking that he was getting.
All the many forms of life on Earth today are descended from a common ancestor. What? You mean the birds and the bananas have a common ancestor?
Yes, they do, and I know it ain't intuitive. The structure of plant and animal cells, if you get a blade of grass and an animal cell from like your skin or something like that and look at it under a microscope, you will see some pretty common features. Well, not pretty common, but common to the both of them. That makes them obviously related, okay? Specifically, you're going to see a nucleus. Now, that's where the DNA is stored, all right? The nucleus. You're also going to see that it's bound by a membrane, no matter whatever you're looking at is plant or animal cell. It's going to have a cell wall. And then you're going to see little shit inside of it. Those are the organelles that make shit happen. They're like the organs in your body, right? They make shit happen. Those are the core commonalities that make them the same, which means that they both belong to what's called the Clade of Eukarya. It's one of the earliest divisions in our entire planet's family tree. Everything that's alive comes from very few roots, and Eukarya is one of the big three that everything on this planet comes from and can trace its ancestry back to. Now, why don't you know that, Hovind?
Because I have made a lifetime habit of avoiding this stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks.
They tell the kids they have evidence of evolution from fossils. I don't think so. That is stupid, okay? If you find a fossil in the dirt, all you know is it died. You don't know that it had any kids, do you? And you sure don't know that it had different kids. You don't know that that's the ancestor of anybody. And why on earth would you think a bone in the dirt can do something animals today cannot do?
Right. You're bone in the dirt fucking deal that you keep going on about. We know a lot more than that it just died, Hovind. We also know that it just happened to live too at some point, obviously. That it lived in an environment that it would have at least been generally suited to. That it was part of a population big enough to have decent odds of fossilizing its remains in the first place, since fossilization is a pretty damn rare thing to have happen at all, and that its characteristics that it had, like, you know, if it had flippers or whatever, or legs, it would determine what kind of environment that it happened to live in, okay? The kind of teeth it had would have indicated its diet, and so on. We can actually learn a lot from fossils, more than I think you're willing to admit, actually. Even setting all that aside, we know from evolution that any offspring wouldn't have been very much different from the parents, all right? Remember that evolution is changes in allele frequency in populations over generations. That means that the genes that give you your eye color, your hair color, your basic body shape, and all that shit, they change. They're not carbon copies from your fucking parents, all right? So those changes eventually become dominant in the population over several generations. You see how that works? It's not something giving birth to something else that isn't so radically different from its parents, like you say. The changes are gradual, like looking at daily snapshots of yourself, with each snapshot being just about, you can compare it to individual generations. Each picture of every day is like an individual generation. You can't really see any difference from day to day, but if you look at the gap from here to there, there's obvious similarities. You can tell they were related, and you can also tell there's some changes going on there. All right, that's how that works.
He said, Mr. Patterson, I read your book on evolution. I noticed you didn't show us the missing links. Why didn't you show us the missing links? Patterson wrote back and said, I fully agree with your comments on the lack of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. I will lay it on the line, there is not one such fossil.
This is a really popular quote of mine. There's no context at all. And looking at the context shows that he is really trying to mislead people here. All right? I'm going to quote from where he stopped. For which one make a watertight argument. The reason is that statements about ancestry and descent are not applicable to the fossil record. Is Archaeopteryx the ancestor of all birds? Perhaps yes, perhaps no. There's no way of answering the question. It is easy enough to make up stories of how one form gave rise to another and to find reasons why the stages should be favored by natural selection. But such stories are not part of science, for there is no way to put them to the test. Now, this sounds pretty damning and implies that the scientific community has no idea what it's talking about. That ain't the case, however. So, here's the deal, y'all. Patterson don't know for sure if Archaeopteryx is the thing that all birds come from, or if it's a cousin to the thing that all birds come from. It ain't easy to tell, and he ain't going to say one way or the other because he is not sure about the answer. See, that's what scientists do when they ain't for sure. They're supposed to be cautious and all, so they don't shoot themselves in the foot, you know? I do need to point out that Patterson does believe there are transitional fossils. It's just that there are points where the line blurs between what's ancestral to what, and that it can be hard to tell sometimes. You can always count on creationists to twist uncertain language to look like there's more uncertainty than there actually is. Like walking in on your girlfriend and your best friend. Sure, he may have only been 98% inside of her, but it's still pretty clear what's going on since you heard her screaming his name and encouraging him. Now, despite what Patterson says, I don't particularly agree with him here. Historical claims can certainly be scientific, and the one example he gives is due to a lack of fossil evidence. But we have a hell of a lot of evidence from other lines that can prove the point here. Bear in mind, y'all, this is from the 90s, and that we've come really a long way since then.
Even Stephen Gould admitted the absence of fossil evidence for intermediary stages is a persistent and nagging problem for evolution.
And I didn't count on having to go through every quote like this. Basically, since fossilization is a rare and very specific process, there will be gaps where things don't get fossilized. The fact these gaps exist is why we've only accounted for around 1% of everything that has ever lived on this planet. There will always be gaps, but that doesn't disprove the theory.
Richard Goldschmidt said, maybe the first bird hatched from a reptile egg.
Are you fucking kidding me? A quote from 1940? Could you be more out of date here? Birds are more closely related to reptiles than anything else alive today, but this ridiculous straw man image you put here is inexcusably wrong. Evolution theory at no point demands this ever. This goes back to what we talked about earlier, with gradual changes through time. At no point did anything ever give birth to something that was so radically different from its parents like this cartoon shows.
Charlie Darwin graduated from Bible college to be a preacher.
Don't care. It ain't relevant. Dr. Bacher consulted on Jurassic Park, and he's a Pentecostal preacher. Believing in God don't mean you can't understand evolution and accept the facts, Hovinds.
And while he's sailing around, he stopped off at these islands right there called the Galapagos Islands. There on those islands, Charlie noticed there were 14 different varieties of finches. Charlie studied the birds very carefully and said, you know what, I think all these birds had a common ancestor. I bet you're right, Charlie. It was a bird.
No kid. Yeah, their great-grandpapa was a bird, and their great-mama too, but you ain't looking far enough down the family tree, Hovind. Y'all think that birds just magically popped out of thin air into the air one day about 6,000 years ago, but you're forgetting about things like Archaeopteryx from earlier. Things like that were part of the great-great-great-great-grandparents of birds. So where's the line here, Hovind? When did dinosaurs become a bird?
And then Charlie said in his book on page 170, he said, it is a truly wonderful fact that all animals and all plants throughout all time and space should be related to each other. Now, hold on a minute. You see 14 kinds of birds, and you conclude that birds and bananas are related.
No, Hovind. There was a lot more research that he did before he came to that conclusion. It ain't like he published Origin of Species right when he walked off the Beagle. He had a hell of a lot more research to do, but eventually did see the connection by working off the findings of people like Linnaeus, who'd already noticed the branch and tree pattern showing all life being related to common ancestors no matter where you looked.
Okay, we don't ever see a bird produce a non-bird. See, dogs produce dogs, and you might get quite a variety of dogs. Roses produce roses. That is called microevolution. Now, that is a fact, folks. It happens. It is observable. It is scientific. I don't think we ought to use that word, microevolution. We should just call it a variation. But they use it, so, just so I qualify that, it's a lousy term. It gives what's called a free rider effect to the rest of the 5 religious ideas of evolution.
There's that equivocation again. You're mixing definitions. Tried and true creationist tactic. Stick to the topic, Hovind. I'm skipping the bit after this. Reason being is he's doing the same thing with dogs and shit that he did with the finches by not going down the family tree far enough. He knows what's there. He just ain't going to touch it and avoid it like, well, I'd say the plague, but he don't seem to think the Rona is the thing, so...
See, variations happen within the dog kind. You get a big dog or a little dog, but there are limits to these variations. Haven't the farmers been trying to breed for bigger pigs for a long time? They try to get the biggest pig they can, don't they? Do you think they'll ever get a pig as big as Texas?
My liver can take this. I know my liver can take this. No, Hovind. What in the ever-loving fuck makes you think that we'll ever get a pig as big as Texas? I mean, I love me some bacon, but you do remember that gravity's a thing, right? And that there's a hard limit on how big something can get before it gets crushed under its own weight. The physics ain't gonna let that shit happen. Hell, the elephant's about as big as you can get for a land animal, and the blue whale can't get much bigger at all because of the amount of food it's got to eat to survive. And it lives off gaping fucking mouthfuls of krill, the next best thing to minnows and shrimp.
Roaches become resistant to pesticides after a while. Do you think they'll ever become resistant to a sledgehammer?
Have you seen the arthropods, aka giant goddamn bugs we got in the fossil record? Those sons of bitches are bigger than you and armored to fuck. Hit this bastard with a sledgehammer and you'll just piss it off. Shit, there's a beetle today that don't give 2 fucks if you stomp on it with a steel-toed boot. It'll just shrug that shit off and keep on trucking like you ain't even in the top 5 things it gives a goddamn about. Bug collectors have to drill a damn hole in it to put it to a fucking corkboard. It wouldn't surprise me at all if it survived being shot and just walked it off.
They still produce the same kind of plant or animal. That's not evolution. That's just a variation of the same kind, okay? And the information for that variety was already present in the gene pool. No new information is ever added. The dogs or the pigs don't learn to fly or become pink. Okay, there's no new information added, just scrambled information. And the gene pool of the new variety is now more limited than before. Somebody spent years crossbreeding dogs to develop a Chihuahua. All that work to make a dog that is 100% useless.
Hovind, what in the hell is a kind? You know that what you just said about everything for that kind being in the gene code is a lie. Remember a couple years ago when you tried to debate Aaron? In the broccoli example you used, you showed everyone that there is no way in hell that the original mustard plant could have all the mutations you need to make cabbage, kohlrabi, kale, cauliflower, and broccoli at the same goddamn time. Those are mutations that made those plants different. Changing the information makes it new information right off the bat, man. You can't put wings on a pig. There ain't nothing to work with there. And pigs are too heavy to fly anyway. Speaking from an aviation background, to get a toddler like Cupid to fly, you'd have to give it a 6-foot fucking wingspan at the very least. Imagine that fucker flying around. He ain't cute no more, is he? Fucking terrifying. Yeah, Chihuahuas are damn near useless, but your slide is dead-ass wrong. If we wanted, we could breed it back to a dog bigger than the Great Dane. That's artificial selection, though. That means we pick and choose as breeders what we want in the dog. So it's a hell of a lot faster than natural selection. Hell, at this point, we ain't going to be able to get dogs much bigger than English Mastiff anyway. Remember that whole gravity problem from before? The reason elephants can get so big is because they have a big-ass ball of fat in their heel, pretty much, that helps to support their weight. They're still kind of digigrade, running around on all their toes and shit, but dogs can't do that because they don't have that little bundle of fat there to cushion. That's why they can't get much bigger than they are. That's about all I can take of Hovind right now. I know I mentioned that this next video might feel a little bit rushed, but let me know if you like the Southern drawl that I'm throwing in there now. I'm trying to reword things a little bit better for people to understand. As usual, like, subscribe, comment, all that good shit, and I'll see you next time, guys.